Those 8 words hit me harder than any fist I had ever taken in my 68 years of life. I stood inside the handicap stall of the marble-tiled bathroom at the Ritz-Carlton, my hand gripping the stainless steel railing so hard my knuckles turned white. My other hand was clenched into a fist, ready to batter down the door. It was the smooth, polished baritone of Bradley Pierce, the man who in less than 2 hours was scheduled to cut a 3-tier cake with my daughter, Sarah. I stopped breathing, but look at her father's bank account. It was Chad Bradley's best man and college roommate. If you can hold your breath for 2 years, you will never have to work a day in your life again. The old man looks like he has 1 foot in the grave already. I heard the sound of a zipper, then the splash of water against the urinal. I am Clint Sullivan. You are a genius, Brad, Chad continued, his voice echoing off the tiles. And let's be honest, she takes up half the bed. I close my eyes and think of the money. Bradley's laugh was a sharp sound that made my stomach turn. I tell her she is beautiful and she melts. Gambling debts. They thought I was the prey. They were about to find out that they had locked themselves in a cage with a patient predator. I waited until I heard the water running in the sinks. I took a deep breath, released my death grip on the railing, and unlocked the stall door. Bradley and Chad froze. Bradley's hands were covered in soap foam, his face draining of all color in a single second. He knew I had been in the stall. He knew I must have heard everything. Sullivan, Bradley stammered, spinning around, water dripping from his hands onto his shiny dress shoes. We didn't know you were in here. I stopped at the sink next to him. She would defend him. She would say I was being controlling, that I misunderstood. I needed total destruction. I reached up to my right ear and tapped the beige device sitting there. But right now, it was my greatest weapon. I pulled it out and shook it, frowning like a confused pensioner. Damn piece of junk, I grumbled, my voice loud and slightly slurred. The battery died 20 minutes ago. I have been walking around in silence all night. I put the device back in my ear and looked at Bradley with a vacant, innocent smile. Did you say something, son? The music out there is too loud for my old ears. I came in here for some peace and quiet. The relief that washed over Bradley's face was insulting. His shoulders dropped 3 in. He exchanged a quick smirking glance with Chad. We are safe. Oh, nothing, Dad, Bradley said, his voice regaining its oily confidence. He even patted my shoulder with a wet hand. We were saying how beautiful the party is and how lucky I am to be marrying Sarah. We should get back out there. I washed my hands, scrubbing them as if I could wash away the filth of their presence. She was 32, a brilliant accountant who could spot a tax error from a mile away, but who couldn't see that the man holding her hand was a parasite. He looked at her with an adoration that I now knew was as fake as a $3 bill. Clint Bradley's mother, Karen, leaned across the table. This venue is spectacular, although I must say the service is a bit slow. We have been waiting for the champagne refill for 5 minutes. I will take care of it, I said. Bradley leaned in, bypassing Sarah to talk to me. Dad, speaking of taking care of things, I wanted to ask you something. I know this isn't the time, but Sarah and I were looking at that property in the hills again. The agent says if we don't put down the deposit by Monday, we lose it. He was doing it. He was asking for money in the middle of his own engagement party. He knew I wouldn't cause a scene in front of the guests. He was banking on my love for Sarah to open my wallet. Sarah looked down at her plate. Dad, we can wait. We don't need a mansion right away. Nonsense, baby, Bradley said, squeezing her hand too hard. Your father wants us to have the best start possible. Right, Dad. I looked at him. I saw the debt he was hiding. I saw the side piece he was funding. I saw the contempt he held for my daughter, and I smiled. I said. I pulled out my checkbook from my inside pocket. Bradley's eyes widened. I want you two to be secure. How much was the deposit again? 50,000, Bradley said. 2, I wrote the check. He didn't look at Sarah. He didn't say thank you to her. You are generous to a fault, Clint, Karen said, eyeing the check in her son's hand. I saw him wink at Chad across the room. I was going to dismantle Bradley Pierce's life. I was going to strip him of his reputation, his freedom, and his future. When the party finally wound down and the guests began to leave, Sarah came over to hug me. Thank you, Daddy, she whispered. Today was perfect. He is perfect. I held her tighter than usual. I am glad you are happy, sweetheart. I lied. Go home, get some rest, I told them. You have a future ahead of you. I watched them drive away in the convertible I had leased for them. He didn't even open the door for her. I sat in the driver's seat, the silence of the night wrapping around me. I didn't start the engine. Instead, I pulled out my phone. It was 11:45 p.m. He was not a nice lawyer. "It's late. I need you to open a file. Who is the target?" Leonard asked, his tone shifting instantly from sleepy to professional. "I don't care about the cost," I said. "I want him destroyed." I hung up the phone and started the car. I knew where that money was going. It wasn't going to a house deposit. I pulled into my driveway and looked at the dark windows of my empty house. She would have gutted Bradley with a kitchen knife the moment he called our daughter a cow. I missed her ferocity. I didn't turn on the lights. I sat in the dark, replaying the conversation in the bathroom over and over in my head. "Enjoy the glass, Bradley," I whispered to the empty room. My phone buzzed. "We are so lucky." I wanted to tell her to run. I wanted to tell her to pack a bag and come home. But I couldn't. Not yet. He would lie. He would say I was a jealous old man trying to control her. I needed undeniable, hard evidence that would shatter her delusions instantly. I needed her to see the monster, not hear about him. I wasn't going to sleep tonight. I finished my bourbon and set the glass down with a sharp clink. The investigation had begun. The silence in my house usually brought me peace, a hard-earned reward after decades of noise. The roar of diesel engines, the shouting on loading docks, the endless ringing of phones in the boardroom. But tonight the silence felt like the air before a tornado touches down. My phone sat on the mahogany surface, a black monolith holding the potential to ruin or save my daughter's life. When it finally vibrated, the sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. It wasn't Leonard. I swiped the green icon and brought the phone to my ear, forcing my voice to be steady, to be the rock she had always leaned on. "Hello, sweetheart," I said, sitting up in the darkness. "It is late. Is everything all right?" The sound that came back was a jagged, wet gasp for air. She was crying, that deep chest-heaving sobbing that usually happens when someone has died. My blood went, but the CEO in me knew I had to sit still. "I had to listen, Daddy," she choked out, her voice. "And broken. I don't think I can do this. I don't think I am good enough for him." I gripped the phone tight enough to crack the screen. "You are Sarah Sullivan. You are kind. You are worth 10 of him. Did he say something to you?" There was a pause filled by her ragged breathing. We were looking at the wedding photos from the engagement party. She said, He told me that the camera adds 10, but that I looked like I had eaten the camera, too. He said he was worried about me, Dad. He said that when we are standing at the altar, everyone will be looking at us. And he doesn't want people to wonder why a guy like him is with a girl like me." The rage that filled me was white hot, a blinding flash that made my vision swim. I wanted to roar. I wanted to tell her what he had said in the bathroom. If I attacked him now while she was this vulnerable, she would retreat. She would cling to him. "That is nonsense, Sarah," I said, fighting to keep the growl out of my voice. "You are beautiful. You have your mother's eyes and her smile. He is lucky to be in the same room as you." "No, Dad, you don't understand. He is right," he suggested. He suggested I go see a consultant tomorrow about liposuction. He wanted to carve up my daughter to fit his ego. Or worse, he probably had a deal with the clinic, a kickback for referrals. I couldn't cut him out. He wants everything to be perfect. I realized then that I wasn't fighting a greedy fiancé. I was fighting a brainwashing. He had hollowed her out. This wasn't about money anymore. If he had wanted my fortune, I might have written him a check to leave town. I didn't go back to sleep. I sat at the oak desk that had belonged to my father and opened my laptop. Photos of Bradley, with a blonde woman who was definitely not my daughter, their hands all over each other at a resort in Cabo San Lucas when he was supposed to be at a business conference in Denver. I looked at the timestamps. The trip to Cabo was 3 weeks ago. Sarah had been picking out flower arrangements while he was drinking margaritas with his mistress. I printed every single page. I organized the photos into a neat stack. My daughter thought she wasn't good enough. "Cry tonight, Sarah," I whispered to the empty room. "Because when this is over, you will never shed a tear for this piece of trash again. And Bradley, you wanted perfection. I am going to give you a perfect ending." He did not touch the coffee I had poured for him. He did not make talk about the weather or the game last night. He slid a thick manila envelope across the mahogany desk. The sound of the paper sliding against the wood was a dry whisper like tires skidding on gravel before a crash. You make the necessary adjustments to keep the rig on the road. I put on my reading glasses and opened the dossier. I read it the way I used to read a bill of lading or a driver S-log book. I was looking for the rot beneath the cargo. The logistics of his infidelity were documented with the precision of a shipping manifest. Leonard had done his job well. There were photos taken with a telephoto lens, grainy, but undeniable. She was his administrative assistant. This was the hazardous material. The text read, "I cannot believe I have to pretend to listen to the old man's war stories about the road. He smells like diesel in desperation. As soon as the ink is dry on the marriage license, I am putting him in a home. We will sell off the logistics company for parts. No one needs a trucking company run by a dinosaur." I stopped reading. I looked at my hands. I remembered missing my wife's birthdays and my daughter SS school plays, because I was driving through the night to build the empire that this boy wanted to sell for parts. He did not want my money. He wanted to take the sweat and blood I had poured into my company and turn it into chips at a poker table. I looked up at Leonard. "He is thorough," I said, my voice flat. "He is reckless," Leonard replied. "He is." I said, "He wants to put me in a home. He has already contacted a broker." Leonard said he made a preliminary inquiry about the valuation of Sullivan Logistics. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked out at the dark driveway. "He thinks I am a senile old trucker," I whispered to the glass. "He thinks I am a checkbook with a pulse. Let him run. Let him think the road is clear. If I tell her now, she will not believe me. She will think I am the villain. She needs to see the wreckage with her own eyes." I opened the bottom drawer and pulled out a bottle of rye whiskey, the kind I used to drink when I could barely afford to fill the tank. I pushed one toward Leonard. "Drink up, Leo," I said. "We have a lot of work to do. He wants to play games with my company. I am going to show him how we handle hijackers in this business." I picked up the file again. I memorized the name of the bookie. I memorized the timestamps. This was not evidence anymore. Bradley Pierce wanted to take the wheel. Fine. The view from here was usually my favorite thing in the world. I could see the vast expanse of the distribution yard, the rows of 18-wheelers lined up like soldiers, and the constant rhythmic movement of commerce that I had built from nothing. I had spent an hour before Bradley arrived setting the stage. I loosened my tie until it looked sloppy. I left a bottle of antacids conspicuously on the desk. I even practiced a weary sigh that rattled in my chest. If Bradley Pierce wanted to believe I was a dinosaur on the verge of extinction, I was going to give him a fossil. Leonard had drafted the document sitting in front of me. It was a bear trap painted gold. My assistant buzzed in. "Mr. Send him in," I said, making my voice sound thin and tired. The door opened and Bradley walked in. He walked with a strut, a bounce in his step that screamed ownership. He was measuring the drapes. He was imagining himself sitting in my chair. "Dad," he said, flashing that bright, predatory smile. "You wanted to see me? Is everything okay? You sounded serious on the phone." I stood up, pressing my hands against the desk as if lifting my own weight was a struggle. I didn't offer a handshake. I offered a weak, trembling grip. "I needed to talk to you. The business, the stress, the constant fighting with the unions and the board. I see the future. You deserve a break. I deserve to rest," I corrected him. "I want to step down as CEO. I want to hand the reins over to someone I trust." His pupils dilated. "I would be honored, Clint," he said, his voice dropping an octave to sound serious and executive. "You know I have ideas. I can take this company to the next level. I will protect your legacy." "I know you will," I lied. "But there is a problem." Bradley frowned. "What problem?" "The board of directors," I said. "They are old-fashioned. They are worried that you are marrying Sarah for the position. They need assurance." I leaned forward, looking him in the eye. "They are insisting on a prenuptial agreement, Brad." I saw the flash of anger in his eyes. It was quick, sharp, and dangerous. He opened his mouth to protest, to play the offended lover, but I cut him off before he could speak. "If I want to appoint you as my successor, I have to give them this." I slid the blue folder across the desk. He didn't read the whole thing. "If the marriage dissolves after 2 years, for any reason initiated by Sarah Sullivan, Mister," he looked up at me, stunned, "5 million, marry the fat girl, wait 2 years, run the company, maybe drive it into the ground or sell it off, then get Sarah to file for divorce, which would be easy enough." This is generous, Clint," he said, trying to suppress a grin. "I mean, I don't plan on us ever divorcing. I love Sarah, but I appreciate the security. The board insisted on a morality clause. It is standard stuff to protect the company's image. I pointed to the bottom of page 32C. Furthermore, Mr. Bradley glanced at it. He didn't pause. Why would he? In his mind, he wasn't going to get caught. He had been cheating on Sarah for months, and she didn't have a clue. He thought he was invisible. He didn't know that I had photos of him entering a Motel 6 in my bottom drawer. He didn't know I had transcripts of him calling my daughter a cow. He didn't know that documented intent to defraud included text messages to his best friend about selling my company for parts. "Oh, this is fine," Bradley said dismissively. "I have eyes for Sarah. This doesn't apply to me." I pulled a Mont Blanc pen from my pocket. I uncapped it and held it out to him. "Then we have a deal," I said. "You sign this and I announce your succession at the wedding reception. The company is yours, Brad." His hand didn't shake. He didn't hesitate. He didn't ask to show it to a lawyer, because his greed was screaming so loud it drowned out his survival instinct. He was already imagining which of my employees he would fire first. "Thanks, Clint," he said, dropping the dad. "You won't regret this." I took the folder and closed it. I placed it squarely in the center of the desk. "I know I won't," I said. He was already selling off the trucks I had bought with my own sweat. "We will talk about it," I said after the wedding. The door clicked shut. The silence returned to the office. "What footage? You gave him the Mercedes yesterday, right?" It was done. The trap wasn't set, it had been sprung. Bradley Pierce was walking around as a dead man. He didn't know he had stopped breathing yet. "Send it to the secure server," I said. I hung up and turned my chair to face the window. I wasn't tired, I wasn't old, and I had secured the most important cargo of my life, my daughter's freedom. The waiting room of the aesthetic surgery clinic smelled of lavender and rubbing alcohol, a scent that tried to mask the pain being purchased behind the frosted glass doors. I sat in a leather chair that cost more than the transmission on my first rig, thumbing through a magazine I was not reading. The door opened and the surgeon beckoned us in. He was a man with teeth too white and skin too tight, a salesman of insecurities. Sarah walked in with her head down, wearing a hospital gown that seemed to shrink her spirit even further. Bradley walked in like he owned the building. He asked Sarah to stand on a platform. She shivered. Bradley crossed his arms and critiqued her, like he was inspecting a used truck for rust. "Take a more off the hips, Doc," he said, pointing a manicured finger at my daughter. "And the arms, we do not want any spillover." Sarah looked at me, her eyes wide and wet with humiliation. She was begging me to be her dad, to roar like a lion, and throw these two men through the window. My muscles tensed, ready to strike. I wanted to grab that marker and shove it down Bradley's throat, but I forced myself to stay frozen. If I saved her now, she would resent me. She would think I was controlling her. She would think I did not want her to be beautiful. "Is this safe, doctor?" I asked, my voice quavering enough. Bradley rolled his eyes at the surgeon, a silent commiseration about the senile old man in the corner. "Routine, we will sculpt her, help her reach her potential, sculpt her like she was clay, like she wasn't a living, breathing woman who had graduated with honors and managed a fleet of 500 trucks." "Do it," Sarah whispered. "Do it. I want to look right." I watched as the doctor drew black circles on her skin, mapping out her insecurities. I wrote the check for the deposit, right there in the office. $30,000 to mutilate my daughter's self-esteem. As I handed it to the receptionist, I felt like I was paying a ransom, but the hostage was not coming home yet. It followed us to the dinner table. 2 nights later, I invited them over to the house. I had spent the afternoon in the kitchen cooking Sarah's favorite meal. It was comfort on a plate. The house smelled of thyme and beef broth, a smell that usually brought a smile to Sarah's face. When they arrived, she walked into the kitchen and inhaled, her eyes lighting up for the first time in weeks. "Oh, Dad, that smells amazing," she said, reaching for a roll from the basket. Bradley's hand shot out and slapped her wrist. "Do you want scars?" Sarah pulled her hand back like she had been burned. "I haven't eaten since breakfast." I had set up alerts on all of Sarah's accounts years ago, in case of fraud, but this fraud was walking through the front door. It was the modern thing to do. I sat in my office and watched the transactions roll in on my screen. $40,000 transferred to an account in the Caymans. "I am at the gas station. My card was declined. I don't have any cash. Where is Brad?" I asked, leaning back in my chair, staring at the ceiling to keep the tears from falling. He is in a meeting, she said, defending him, even as she stood there humiliated. The transfers haven't cleared yet. I couldn't give her more. If I gave her $1 ton, Bradley would take it. I had to keep her desperate. I know it is hard, Sarah, I said, playing the role of the oblivious old man. You listen to Brad, he knows what he is doing with the markets. I hung up the phone and threw a crystal paper weight across the room. I was breaking her. I had to make sure that when she finally exploded, she aimed the blast in the right direction. I didn't clean it up. Let the listing go live. I typed back I was not going to stop him. And when he fell, I would be standing at the top, holding the shovel. They swept into the room with the air of royalty visiting the colonies. Richard wore a suit that was too shiny, the kind that looks from a distance, but feels like polyester up close. They were the architects of Bradley's entitlement, the blueprint for his greed. Clint, Richard said, extending a hand that felt like a dead fish. Good to see you. Leonard's report had confirmed it that morning. They were 3 months behind on the payments. Sarah and Brad are on their way. They are coming from the dress fitting. I hope you don't mind. Clint, she said with a tight smile. We ordered a bottle of Dom Perignon for the table before we came in. We thought we should celebrate. After all, it is not every day our Bradley marries into settles down into money. I finished the sentence in my head. Of course, I said aloud. Order whatever you like. It is on me. They ordered the tasting menu with the wine pairing. They ordered caviar supplements. Bradley kissed his mother on the cheek and shook his father's hand. Dad, he said, giving me a nod. Good to see you. Dinner was a masterclass in passive aggression. Richard spent the first course talking about his glory days as a consultant, a vague term that I knew meant he moved money between failing shell companies. He asked me about my business, but not out of interest. 18 wheels and a prayer, Richard chuckled, looking at Karen. We always focused on intellectual capital, strategy, the picture. It is good that Brad is stepping in. You need someone with a modern touch, someone who doesn't smell like the highway. I chewed my steak. It was cooked, but it tasted like cardboard. Brad has a lot of energy, I said neutrally. Karen chimed in, looking at Sarah. And Sarah, darling, you look better. The diet is working. Maybe ask the photographer to shoot from above. Sarah put down her fork. She hadn't taken a bite. She looked at Bradley, waiting for him to defend her. We want the photos to be timeless. The handle dug into my palm. I wanted to tell Karen that her necklace was fake and her son was a thief, but I couldn't. I cleared my throat. It wasn't a ring box. I put it on the table. The sound it made was and. Richard's eyes darted to the box. Bradley sat up straighter. I know things have been stressful, I said, making my voice sound weary and sentimental. I know I am an old trucker. I don't know much about intellectual capital or strategy, but I know about taking care of family. I opened the box. They gleamed under the chandelier light. This is for you, I said, looking at Bradley and Sarah. But mostly I was looking at Bradley's parents. Bradley's breath hitched. Is this? It is the house in the hills, I said. The one you wanted. The deposit wasn't enough. I bought it outright, cash, a wedding gift. The silence was shattered by a collective gasp from the pierced side of the table. Richard choked on his wine. Karen's eyes bulged. The whole thing debt-free, I said. Karen let out a squeal of delight. She clapped her hands together. Richard leaned back, a smug grin spreading across his face. I wasn't a dirty trucker anymore. A proper start for a Pierce, not a Sullivan. He was already erasing my daughter's name from the deed in his mind. Bradley grabbed the keys. He didn't hand them to Sarah. He shoved them into his own pocket. Thank you, Dad, he said, his eyes shining with victory. You won't regret this. We are going to make it a showplace. Sarah looked at me, tears welling in her eyes. Dad, this is too much. You shouldn't have. I smiled at her, tired smile. Nothing is too much for you, sweetheart. I watched them celebrate. Bradley was texting under the table, probably telling Chad or his mistress that he had scored a $3 million payday. They didn't ask about the paperwork. They didn't ask to see the deed. They were so blinded by the shiny brass keys that they didn't ask a single question. If they had, they might have noticed that the keys were not accompanied by a title transfer. They might have learned that the house was not purchased in Bradley's name, or even Sarah's name. It was purchased by the Sullivan Family Charitable Trust, a legal entity I had established 20 years ago to support retired drivers. Residency is contingent upon the moral standing of the occupants and their employment within the Sullivan Logistics Corporation. Any act of fraud, embezzlement, or criminal activity, immediately terminates the agreement and results in immediate eviction and liability for fair market rent for the duration of the stay. I wasn't giving them a house, but tonight I let them drink the champagne. I let Richard brag about his son's success. I let Karen plan her garden parties in my yard. When the check came, Richard didn't even reach for his wallet. He looked at me and smiled. "Great dinner, Clint," he said. "Top-notch, I paid the bill. $20,000. He pulled her close, but his eyes were on the valet bringing around the Mercedes I had given him. "I love you, babe," he said loud enough for me to hear. "We are going to be so happy in that house." Sarah leaned into him, desperate to believe him. "I love you too, Brad." I watched them drive away. I stood on the sidewalk alone. The night air was cool. I took a deep breath. "Enjoy the house, Bradley," I whispered. "Don't unpack." My phone buzzed. It was Leonard. "I have the final piece." The message read, "The wedding is in 3 days. Are we still a go?" I looked at the message. I thought about Sarah's hollow eyes. I thought about Karen's insults. I thought about the keys in Bradley's pocket. I typed "Load the cannon." The dinner was over. The pleasantries were finished. Now it was time for the slaughter. It was the thing I drank when I was driving long haul because it was, and it did the job. I needed to remember who I was. It was the footage from the internal camera I had installed in the Mercedes S-Class, the $80,000 engagement gift that Bradley had driven away in, with a smile that could sell ice to an Eskimo. The timestamp showed 11:30 p., 2 hours after our dinner, 2 hours after I had handed him the keys to a mansion. Bradley was in the driver's seat. She was young, blonde, and laughing. "I cannot believe he bought it," she said, her voice tinny through the speakers, but clear enough to cut glass. "A whole mansion, Brad. You are a legend." Bradley laughed. That sound, that same sharp laugh I had heard in the bathroom at the engagement party. It made the hair on my arms stand up. "I told you, baby," he said, reaching over to rest his hand on her knee. "The old man is soft." "What was it?" Bradley snorted. "A piece of paper." "So what is the plan?" Jessica asked, tracing a finger down his arm. "Can we pull this off? 2 years is a long time to pretend." Bradley exhaled a plume of smoke. "It is not 2 years. Once we are married tomorrow, the clock starts ticking on the company. Clint wants to retire. He is going to hand over operational control within the month." He took a drag of the cigarette, his eyes gleaming. I paused the video. I sat in the silence, the hum of the computer fan, the sound in the room. I looked at the frozen image of Bradley S.'s face, twisted in a sneer of malice. He wasn't a cheater. He was a predator. He was planning to imprison her in her own home, starve her of resources, and break her mind until she crumbled. He wanted to destroy my life's work and leave my child in the ruins. I finished the bottle of Old Crow. I set the empty glass down on the desk. "You made a mistake, Bradley," I whispered to the screen. "You thought you were playing chess with a pigeon. You thought you could knock over the pieces and strut around." I opened the drawer of my desk and pulled out a fresh flash drive. I copied the bank statements Leonard had found. It was freshly pressed, hanging in a plastic bag. Tomorrow, I was going to walk my daughter down the aisle. But I wasn't giving her to Bradley. I was giving her back to herself. The sky was beginning to turn a majestic purple in the east. Dawn was coming. The wedding day, they worry about the catering. I wasn't worried about any of that. I didn't need a speech. I needed an indictment. I printed the pages, the printer word, and spat them out one by one, warm and sharp. The room plunged back into darkness. I wasn't Clint the CEO anymore. I wasn't Clint the nice old man. I looked at my reflection. My eyes were red-rimmed and tired, but they were hard. "I am coming for you, son," I said to the mirror. I sat at the kitchen table and watched the sun come up. I remembered how she didn't cry until she saw the look on my face. Bradley thought he could break her. He thought he could turn her into a victim. He was about to find out that Sullivans don't break. We might bleed, but when we snap back, we take heads off. It was time to go to church. The cathedral was suffocating. It smelled of $50,000 worth of imported white lies and the stale recycled air of old money. This wasn't the modest family church where I had buried my wife Diana. I looked around at the spectacle my future son-in-law had orchestrated with my money. There was a 12-piece string orchestra, playing something that sounded like it belonged at a royal funeral. The guest list had bloated to 300 people, half of whom I didn't know. They were Bradley's associates, slick-haired men in shiny suits, and women who looked at the decor with calculating eyes, estimating the cost per square foot. I didn't wave back. I stared at the altar where Bradley was waiting. Bradley looked like he had stepped out of a magazine ad for men who don't work for a living. His tuxedo was midnight blue, custom-tailored to hide the softness of a man who had never lifted anything heavier than a poker chip. He was rocking back on his heels, scanning the crowd, smiling that winning smile. He wasn't nervous in his mind. He wasn't standing at an altar. I checked my inside pocket. The flash drive was in my hand, clenched tight. The orchestra swelled, the music shifting to the bridal march. She wasn't glowing. She was pale, the kind of pallor that comes from exhaustion and fear. I felt her trembling. It wasn't the nervous tremble of a bride. It was the weakness of a woman running on empty. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," I lied, whispering into her ear. "He is wrong," I said. "You are perfect." We walked the rest of the way together. I could see Karen critiquing the fit of the dress. I could see Richard nodding approvingly at the spectacle. We reached the altar. Bradley stepped forward. He didn't look at Sarah's face. His grip was possessive, the hand of a man claiming his property. "Who gives this woman to be married to this man?" the priest asked. I looked at Bradley. "I do," I said. My voice flat. I stepped back and sat down in the front pew, but I didn't get comfortable. I sat on the edge of the wood, my muscles coiled. The ceremony began. The priest droned on about love, honor, and cherishing. I watched Sarah. She was staring at Bradley with a look of desperate devotion, trying so hard to be what he wanted, trying so hard to be worthy of the love he pretended to give. I couldn't let it go on. I couldn't let them exchange vows. If she said "I do," it would break her when the truth came out. The priest paused, taking a breath before the vows. "And now, if anyone here has cause why these two may not be lawfully joined together, let him speak now, or forever hold his peace." A few people shifted in their seats. I stood up. "Excuse me, Father," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but in the acoustic perfection of the cathedral, it carried to the back row. He looked over his glasses, confused. Bradley froze. Sarah turned to look at me, her eyes wide with alarm. "Dad," she whispered. I stepped out of the pew and walked up the 3 marble steps to the altar. I didn't look at Sarah. I couldn't. But then his arrogance kicked in. He remembered the prenup. A slow, greasy smile spread across his face. He nudged Chad with his elbow. He winked at his best man. He thought I was so eager to hand over the company that I couldn't even wait for the reception. He thought I was about to give a speech, handing him the keys to the kingdom right there in the house of God. "It is okay," Father Bradley said, his voice smooth and magnanimous. "My father-in-law is a man of action. Please, Clint, take the floor." He stepped aside, gesturing to the lectern where the microphone stood. I walked to the lectern. I gripped the sides of the wood. I looked out at the sea of faces. "I do have some news." The smile dropped from Bradley's face like it had been cut with a knife. The color drained out of him so fast he looked like a wax figure. The trap snapped shut and the echo of it filled the room. "You know, folks, when a father gives away his daughter, he looks for certain qualities in the man standing at the end of the aisle. He looks for honesty. He looks for a man who speaks the truth, even when he thinks no one is listening." I looked down at Bradley. He nodded at me, a gracious, humble nod, encouraging the old man to finish his rambling so we could get to the part where I handed over the keys to the kingdom. He thought this was the preamble to the coronation. He squeezed Sarah's hand, performing the role of the devoted lover for the cameras and the crowd. Bradley's smile faltered. A flicker of confusion crossed his eyes. He remembered me shaking the device. He remembered me complaining about the dead battery. "You all know I have had some trouble with my hearing lately," I said, looking directly at him. Bradley was sympathetic about it. He knows that sometimes an old man needs a help to understand what is going on around him. But what Bradley didn't know is that this isn't a hearing aid. It is a state-of-the-art receiver. It connects to my phone and it records. The silence in the cathedral changed texture. Bradley's face went slack. The color began to drain from his cheeks, starting at his jaw and washing up to his hairline, leaving him the color of old parchment. He dropped Sarah's hand. It was connected to the church's audio system via a Bluetooth dongle I had given the sound engineer 5 minutes before the service started, along with a $100 bill. "I think it is important that we all hear Bradley vows," I said, "but not the ones he wrote for today. I want you to hear the vows he made when he thought the world wasn't watching. I want you to hear the vows he made to his best man in the bathroom of the Ritz-Carlton 3 weeks ago. Bradley lunged. Clint, no, don't. But he was too far away and he was too slow. It was crystal clear. I would rather chew glass than touch that cow. It was Bradley. It was the smooth baritone that had charmed my daughter and fooled my board of directors. But now stripped of its polish, it sounded like venom. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. It was a physical sound, a shockwave. She stepped back, her hands flying to her mouth. I didn't stop the recording, I let it play. But look at her father's bank account. And let's be honest, she takes up half the bed. Then Bradley's laugh echoed through the holy space. I close my eyes and think of the money. The sound was the faint hum of the speakers. In his place was a terrified, cornered rat. His face was a mask of panic. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He couldn't look at Sarah. They were gripping the pew in front of them, their knuckles white. Karen's mouth was agape, her makeup looking garish and clownish. Richard looked like he was having a stroke. They weren't horrified because their son was a monster. He shrank back, stumbling against the altar steps. But you forgot one thing, son, I said, looming over him. I drove trucks for 40 years. I can spot a pothole from a mile away. But she wasn't looking at him with love anymore. She was looking at him with the dawn of a painful realization. She is not a cow, I roared, my voice cracking with the rage I had held back for weeks. It was a high, thin squeak. It is not what it sounds like. It was a joke, guys talking. You are taking it out of context. I wasn't done. Now came the cross. He had planned to show pictures of them in Cabo. I pointed the remote at the screen. Let's look at the context, Bradley, I said. It wasn't a montage of romantic photos. It was the prenuptial agreement. I looked at Bradley. You signed this on Tuesday, I said. You signed it because you thought you were smarter than me. I clicked the remote again. This time it wasn't a document. The image was grainy black and white infrared, but the faces were clear. Bradley, Pierce, and Jessica. A gasp went through the crowd louder than the first one. This wasn't words, but I didn't play the whole thing. I didn't need to. I am going to make her life such a living hell. She will leave me. I will kick her out of her own house. I froze the video on Bradley's face, twisted in that demonic sneer, smoke curling from his lips. This is the man you came to celebrate, I said. You violated the contract before the ink was even dry on the marriage license. I said, you lose Bradley. You lose the $5 million. You lose the company. You lose the house. I looked at Leonard, who was standing by the side door. He nodded. And there is one more thing, I said. I clicked the remote one last time. The screen showed a bank transfer receipt, $100,000, from my personal account to Bradley's private account. The memo line read, wedding venue deposit. Next to it, I displayed another document, a receipt from an offshore gambling site. You stole from me, I said. You took the money I gave you for this wedding, and you sent it to a bookie in Costa Rica. That is wire fraud. That is embezzlement. That is grand larceny. Bradley looked up at me, tears of terror mixing with the sweat on his face. Clint, please. I needed time. Don't do this. I didn't see a son. I didn't see a man. I saw a bug that needed to be squashed. There were no flowers. The echo of his own voice calling my daughter a cow faded into the vaulted ceiling of the cathedral. He wasn't looking at the past anymore. I pressed the button on the remote again. The audio recording file vanished from the screen, replaced by a scanned document that was magnified to the size of a billboard. It was the last page of the prenuptial agreement, the one Bradley had signed with such haste in my office days ago. The signature was, projected in black ink, a testament to his own greed. I walked over to him, my footsteps slow and deliberate, echoing like the ticking of a clock that had run out of time. Do you recognize this, Bradley? I asked, my voice amplified by the microphone, cutting through the stunned atmosphere of the church. This is the contract you signed. This is the deal you made with the devil because you thought the devil was sleeping. I pointed the remote laser at the screen, highlighting a paragraph I had asked Leonard to bury deep in the addendums. Clause 14, the forfeit of assets upon proven malice. You saw the payout, but you didn't read the condition, did you, son? You were so busy counting money you didn't have that you missed the trigger mechanism. 300 people were frozen in their pews, the socialites, the business partners, the distant relatives. It was locker room talk. I didn't mean it. You can't hold me to that. The audio hissed for a second before Bradley's voice filled the church again, clear and undeniable. We stripped the assets. It wasn't a gasp of shock. They were watching a man calmly plot the psychological and financial destruction of the woman standing 10 feet away from him in a wedding dress. I didn't turn off the video. I let the image sear into the retinas of every person in that room. Sarah made a sound that I will never forget. It wasn't a sob. It was a keen, sharp intake of breath that sounded like a physical blow. The illusion didn't break. It shattered into dust. Bradley laughed about redecorating my house. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo. He was wearing his charcoal litigation suit, carrying a leather briefcase that looked like it contained nuclear codes. He walked down the aisle with the precision of a heat-seeking missile, his heels clicking on the stone floor. He didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look at Sarah. He looked at Bradley. Leonard handed the papers to Bradley, who took them with trembling hands, like a man accepting his own death certificate. Leonard continued ticking off the items on his fingers. The offer of executive employment within Sullivan Logistics is rescinded. I heard a scream from the front row. It was never your house, Karen, I said, cutting her off. It was a test, and you failed. You measured the drapes before you checked the foundation. Leonard wasn't finished. He pulled another document from the stack. We are filing a civil suit for the recovery of $150,000 in wedding expenses, including the venue, the catering, and the floral arrangements which you insisted upon. I don't have that kind of money. You know I don't. We know, Leonard said as ice. We have reviewed your financials. We know about the loans you took out against your parents' retirement fund. Richard Pierce slumped in his pew, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. He hadn't known that part. And finally, there is the matter of the $100 deposit, Mr. He had wanted to strip my company for parts. He had wanted to sell off my trucks and put me in a home. He had wanted to break my daughter's spirit. Now he was the one who was broken. She wasn't crying anymore. She was looking at Bradley with a detached curiosity, like she was looking at roadkill on the side of the highway. The spell was broken. You wanted to marry a Sullivan, I said to Bradley. I looked at his parents, Richard and Karen, who were huddled together in their pew, looking like refugees in clothes. You thought you were marrying into a bank account. I crumpled it up and threw it at them. It landed on Karen's lap. Here, I said, buy yourself a clue, because that is the inheritance you are getting from me. The crowd was silent, terrified and mesmerized. Get up, I said. He didn't move. He couldn't move. I said, get up, I roared, my voice shaking the stained glass windows. He looked at me, then at Sarah, then at the door. He was looking for an escape route, but there wasn't one because the doors at the back of the church were opening again. And this time it wasn't the caterers. It wasn't the florist. It was the sound of the end. Bradley was still on his knees. He looked over his shoulder at the approaching officers. His face, which had been a mask of terror, now crumbled into something. Tell them. It was alone. I didn't answer him. I crossed my arms and watched the lead officer, a detective named Miller, who I had worked with on cargo theft cases years ago, stepped up to the altar. He didn't look at the flowers. He didn't look at the cross. It was not a gift, I said, my voice cutting through his panic. That is theft, Bradley. And since you used a wire transfer to move the money internationally, the feds are going to want to have a chat with you too. The officer grabbed Bradley's wrist. The click of the handcuffs was loud, sharp, and final. Get your hands off me, Bradley screamed, struggling as they pulled his arms behind his back. Do you know who I am? I am the CEO of Sullivan Logistics. You are unemployed, I corrected him. And you are. They hauled him to his feet. He looked wild. They saw him for what he was, a thief in a rented suit. She hadn't moved. She stood near the lectern, her hands at her sides. She was staring at him with an expression I hadn't seen on her face in years. It wasn't fear. It wasn't love. It was clarity. The fog of gaslighting had lifted, burned away by the heat of the truth I had dropped on the congregation. Tell them we are in love. He is trying to control you. He is jealous of us. Don't let them take me. I held my breath. This was the moment. I had given her the gun, but she had to pull the trigger. If she collapsed now, if she ran to him, everything I had done would be for nothing. Her dress rustled. That is it, baby. Tell them. Sarah looked him up and down. You called me a cow, she said. Bradley blinked. Sarah, that was you said you would rather chew glass than touch me, she continued, her voice rising, gaining strength with every syllable. You said I took up half the bed. I thought she was going to touch his cheek. I thought she was going to offer him comfort. It wasn't a movie slap, it wasn't a theatrical gesture. The sound was like a whip crack. Bradley's head snapped to the side. A bright red handprint bloomed instantly on his cheek. He stumbled back, held up by the grip of the officers. She didn't cry. She didn't apologize. She said, her voice ringing through the church, "And I am certainly not a cow, but you are a pig, and I would rather die alone than spend one more second letting you make me feel." She turned to the officers, but no one was listening. He was yesterday's garbage being taken out to the curb. I watched him go. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I hadn't realized I was carrying. My daughter was back, but we weren't done yet. I turned my attention to the front pew. Richard and Karen Pierce were still sitting there frozen in shock. They looked like two mannequins in a store window that had been smashed with a brick. He had two other guards with him. They weren't wearing tuxedos. They were wearing black tactical gear. "Mr. Sullivan," Mike asked. "Mike," I said, pointing at the Pierce parents. "Now see here, Clint, you cannot treat us like this. We are guests. We had nothing to do with Bradley's financial confusion." Financial confusion. I laughed. "You knew I have never been so insulted in my life. We are leaving you. People are barbaric." "You are not leaving," I said. They didn't use handcuffs, but they didn't use kid gloves either. Another guard took Karen's elbow. "Do not touch me," Karen shrieked, swatting at the guard. "I will sue you. I will sue all of you." "You can try," I said. Karen stopped, struggling. Her eyes went wide. "Loans? He bet the house on this wedding and he lost." The scream she let out was primal. "Get them out," I said, turning my back on them. I heard Karen's shrieks fading as the doors opened and closed. I heard the murmurs of the crowd, the shock turning into a buzz of excitement. She didn't flinch. She wasn't a fragile bird anymore. She was a Sullivan. "Are you okay?" I asked. She looked up at me. "No, sweetheart," I said. Honestly, he didn't know how. You can't love a queen when you are busy trying to steal her crown. She nodded. Sarah grabbed the microphone. Her hand was steady. "There isn't going to be a wedding," she said, her voice booming. "Obviously, but my dad paid for a lot of food and a cake." She looked at me, a mischievous glint in her eye that reminded me of her mother. "And I plan on eating a piece of it." She paused, then added, "And if anyone here was friends with Bradley, you can leave now. The rest of you, let's party." A cheer went up from the Sullivan side of the aisle. "They love to fight her." "Walk me out, Dad," she asked. "Anywhere you want to go," I said. The police cruiser was pulling away with Bradley in the back seat. He saw Sarah laughing. He screamed something, but the glass was thick and we couldn't hear him. I whispered, "You know, Dad," she said, "you were right about one thing." "What is that?" I asked. "And that is a hell of a team. We ate the cake, we drank the champagne, and for the first time in a long time, the Sullivan family was safe." The parasite was gone. The air wasn't stiff with pretension anymore. It was electric with the buzzing energy of a close call. These were people who knew the value of loyalty, and they weren't going anywhere. They had watched me take down a hijacker, and now they wanted to celebrate the recovery of the cargo. We are celebrating a liberation. Ties were loosened. Jackets were thrown over chairs. The open bar, which Bradley had restricted to top-shelf liquor for the VIPs, was open to everyone. I watched a forklift driver pour himself a glass of Dom Perignon and toast the empty space where the groom should have been. She had kicked off her shoes and was curled up, her legs tucked under her dress. She hadn't waited for a knife. She wasn't dainty. She wasn't watching her figure. She was devouring her freedom one bite at a time. I sat down in the chair next to her, the one reserved for the groom. "Not bad for stolen money," I said. It was a wet, choked sound, but it was real. It tastes like calories. "Dad, thousands of wonderful forbidden calories." We sat in silence for a moment, watching the party swirl around us. I looked at her profile. The hollows in her cheeks were still there, the physical evidence of Bradley's torture, but her eyes were clear. The fog was gone. She stopped eating and looked at me. "I could have forbidden the surgery. I could have handed you a check and told you to leave him. But I didn't. It was the hardest thing I had ever had to do. But I knew that if I stepped in, if I played the controlling father, you would have run into his arms." Sarah put down her fork. Her grip was strong. "If you had told me, I wouldn't have believed you. I would have thought you were being the overprotective dad." She looked out at the dance floor, where Leonard was currently trying to teach my head of HR how to salsa. I needed to feel how he was. When we were on the altar and you played that tape, it didn't feel like a surprise. She squeezed my hand. "You didn't break me, Dad. I looked at my daughter. She wasn't the girl I had raised. She was tough now. There was steel in her spine that hadn't been there before. He had wanted a victim. Instead, he had forged a warrior. So what happens now? She asked, looking around the lavish room. We have a lot of leftover food and a house I do not want to live in. I leaned back in the chair, feeling the first true wave of relaxation hit me in months. The house is already taken care of, I said. Listen up, everyone, to Sarah, I said. Looking down at my daughter, the toughest Sullivan of them all, Sarah stood up. To chewing glass, she said with a grin and spitting it out. We drank. It was the taste of a clean getaway. We watched the dismantling of the Pierce fantasy. I think I am going to need a job on Monday since my career as a trophy wife didn't work out. I think there is an opening in the executive wing, I said. I am looking for someone to run the logistics division. Someone who isn't afraid to get their hands dirty. We sat there as the sun began to set outside, casting long shadows across the floor. I sat on the front porch of my house, the same porch where I used to watch Sarah wait for the school bus 30 years ago. Bradley was currently a resident of a federal correctional facility in upstate New York. He was serving a 5-year sentence. Leonard told me that Bradley had been assigned to the kitchen detail. The irony was enough to fatten a hog. He had sent me a letter a month ago. I had burned it in the fireplace without opening it. His parents, Richard and Karen, hadn't fared much better. They were ghosts to me now. Cautionary tales about what happens when you try to hijack a truck without checking who is behind the wheel. The sound of tires on gravel pulled me from my thoughts. The door opened, and Sarah stepped out. She didn't look like the ghost who had walked down the aisle 6 months ago. She looked like a force of nature. She was wearing a tailored pantsuit that screamed authority, and her hair was cut in a sharp professional bob. She had gained back the weight Bradley had shamed her into losing, and she carried it with the grace of a woman who knows who she is. Hey, Dad, she said, dropping the files on the patio table. I got off the phone with the distributors in Chicago. They tried to hike the rates on the refrigerated units. I took a sip of my iced tea, and what did you tell them? She grinned, and it was a smile full of teeth. I am busy, she said, so yes, Dad, I think I am happy. She kissed me on the cheek, grabbed her files, and went inside to finish her work. She didn't need me to protect her anymore. It was old, the edges worn from years of being carried in a wallet. It was a picture of Diana, my wife, taken the day we bought our first truck. I looked at her face illuminated by the dying light of the day. We hit some black ice, but I kept it between the ditches. I put the photo back in my pocket, right over my heart. The house was quiet. I finished my tea. I wasn't Clint the CEO or Clint the victim. I leaned back in the rocking chair and closed my eyes, listening to the distant hum of the highway miles away. The wheels were turning. I learned that real power isn't about shouting the loudest. It's about waiting for the right moment to speak the truth. My daughter learned that her value isn't determined by a man's approval or a dress size, but by her own character and strength. We cleared out the rot from our lives, and in doing so, we made room for something real. Family isn't about blood. It's about loyalty, respect, and having each other's backs when the road gets rough.